If you're thinking of making a career change, you're in the right place. I'm Yesim Nicholson, and Your Big Career Move is your opportunity to listen to stories from ordinary people who've made extraordinary career changes. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you feel inspired to make your own career change, but you're not quite sure where to start, why not buy my book, Ready to Quit Your Job, or join my next career coaching program, both of which you can find at yescareercoaching.com. Today, I'm here with Annika Carroll, and she had this amazing corporate career, which I'm sure she's going to talk to us about in a minute. And now she's doing something completely different. So I'm really excited to find out more about how Anika made her big career change. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you. And shall we go straight into what you were doing before your big career change?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Should I just go right in?
Go for it.
Well, I got a degree in international business. And after that, got a job in corporate human resources. I worked at Johnson and Johnson in Germany at the time. Had a, what I would say, really successful career, worked very hard. That was always my thing, like lots of energy and go, go, go. And I enjoyed it. I was a human resources manager for production side. I supported marketing and sales organizations, all in Germany in the beginning. Then I got, I guess, what was a promotion into supporting our European network of manufacturing sites and a site in South Africa. And so I traveled quite a bit. And then I became pregnant at some point, and then I had to leave that position.
Why did you have to leave? Because you were pregnant?
Well, it was I had the position till I gave birth. And then there would have been a discussion, do I go back into the role or not? Likely not, because they kind of changed structures a little while I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been doing that role for 3 to 4 years when I was saying I kind of could do something different. It was kind of like, no, it's kind of like I would say we overall had like 3 to 4 years in positions, and then we would change roles. So that would have
Is
been
that, sorry to interrupt you, is that because you
yeah.
wanted to, or was that a
Yes.
Johnson and Johnson thing that they didn't want you to get stale, or how did
I
that?
think both. It
Okay.
was if you had the willingness and the potential to advance, okay, go do that, because you're also freeing up a position for somebody younger who could take your role and grow into that, right? Like we
Okay.
kind of tried to spiral people through the organization
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. We did a lot of internal career progression when I was young, like growing into the roles. And we hardly ever hired middle management from the outside
Interesting.
or senior management. We mostly did it internally until we kind of noticed, you know what, you cannot do that as an organization for 15 years. You kind of need a bit of like competition in the house, like from the competitors. We need a bit of know-how of what other people are doing. So we started doing that. But so that wasn't like penalization or anything in that way. I got pregnant. I had the baby very early, so I kind of dropped out of the role, and then I took a year of mat leave, or parental leave, which was planned all along. And then during that year, we had discussions about what role could I go back into, what would be something that I would be interested in, and B, something that would be available.
Okay. And I guess being in HR, does that give you a bit of an unfair advantage because you can see the structure of the whole organization?
No, it makes it harder, actually, I think often.
In what way?
HR is well, I guess it depends on how you position yourself. But if you're staying in your function, HR, at least in J&J, or probably a lot of other corporate big organizations, HR isn't particularly large as a function. It's pretty streamlined. So there isn't a bajillion opportunities available. Like,
Right.
well, there's marketing, and we had whatever 7 different brands. It's like, okay, if you're a senior project manager for that brand and you want to become a senior project manager again, likely there's going to be another brand available. In HR, that's not necessarily that, and they had to backfill my role. Like I was the site HR manager for the manufacturing site. There was no way that position was going to go unfilled for a year. Like we just couldn't do it. And the market at the time also wasn't that you could just hire like an annual, like a 1 year contract type of person. You had to hire permanent.
Yeah.
So that position was gone.
Okay.
And that was fine. And then, but it was more like, then you start discussing with people about, oh, what could be my options for coming back? And then they're like, oh, we have this and this available right now. I was like, you know what? Because we were talking before we hit record, right? Like my pregnancy and everything thereafter didn't go so smoothly. And so I was like, I'm actually thinking about going back part-time and maybe not full-time. And then I started having that discussion and they're like, yeah, we don't really have anything. I'm like, okay. But I had to commute an hour a day one way to the site. And I'm like, I'm not like, I do not have that priority right now anymore. It's not happening. I'm happy to take a pay cut and work part-time so I can totally with commuting get to the 40 hours, but I'm not doing 40 hours plus like 10 hours of driving. And I had a few discussions with other people in the organization and they offered me a job in the pharma business. So I was like, okay, then my next role is let's go to pharma. They were right across the street. I'm like, awesome. And they gave me a job there. That was tough. That was really hard. That was like, even though it's the same company, it was like coming into a new job, like a new, completely new organization. Those people didn't know me. I didn't know pharma. It's completely different. That was a tough year. That was a really tough year with me having a small child at home, still nursing. It was tough to kind of get into, and I wasn't expected to hit the ground running, but I was expecting that from myself kind of, because I was like, hey, I'm a senior HR manager. I know the tools, I know the rules of the game, but the industry was so different and the culture was even different, even though we're one international organization. It took me a while to build the connections and everything. And it wasn't a job I particularly liked, to be honest. And then my previous manager, she was great. She's like, I think I have your dream job. I'm like, well, what's my dream job? She's like, we're running a project. We're going to implement a software system and a call center approach, like an HR services model for all of Germany. Cross sector, 4,000 people, 9 unions to negotiate, like massive. She's like, you've been working international because that's always what I wanted. She's like, there's people from the US, there's people from all over Europe in your project team. Would that be something? I'm like, yes, and I have a small child. I'm not willing to travel a lot. Everybody come here? We're still one of the headquarters. Like, can we just... And they had discussions and it was like, yeah, we can do all that. And they accommodated and it was amazing. It was probably the best year I had. It was just fun. It was killer. It was just a massive project. I loved it. It was exactly like, it was high energy, go, go, go all the time, lots of responsibility, lots of people to delegate stuff to, chaos to manage, fires to extinguish, but I loved it. And I'd already, while I was in that pharma role, I'd started to get sick here and there, which is not my thing. I don't normally get sick. I had like an ear infection that lasted for, I don't know, 2 weeks, didn't go away. And then I got some other funny thing. And then I kind of ignored all that. I was just so like on adrenaline with that project. And then I got food poisoning at Christmas. My husband did too. We went on a date. Like, you never go on a date with a little one, right? Like, we go for breakfast next morning. It's Christmas. My parents are there. They're like, what's with you guys? I'm like, well, I think we have food poisoning. I never recovered from that.
Oh gosh.
For weeks, I went to see all kinds of doctors. They put me on all kinds of stuff. They like shoved cameras down my throat. They had no clue what was going on. I did not recover. I couldn't eat anything anymore. And there was one morning, and then my manager, she was like, yeah, maybe. And I still went to work. And then she's like, yeah, maybe you work from home for a couple of days. I think you're really not doing so well. So I did that. And then one morning, my husband went grocery shopping, came back. I sat there with my laptop. I was like, I'm done. I can't do anything anymore. I'm frozen. I can't. He's like, okay, we shut the laptop. We're gonna go see a doctor now. And then we'll see what they say, which he was really nice. He was like, no, you're not going back to work. At that time, there was discussions about, and we knew this. That's why that HR services project that I was running was happening, that the organization's going to get restructured. A lot of us are going to lose their jobs. I was in discussion for a job that I didn't want, and I was fine with it. I was like, just I'll finish this here and then I'm out. That's totally cool. I don't want that position. But I never got to that because I just never went back because I was so burnt out that I just couldn't.
When you went to see the doctor, did the doctor tell you that you were burnt out? Or how did you realize that's what was causing these
Well, he was
symptoms that you
asking
had?
a lot of things. He ran a bajillion tests and he's like, I think, is this maybe multiple things here? With like, is that whole birthing thing still, and your child having medical issues, is this still part of the... I'm like, well, probably, like it's a piece of the puzzle. Is what's going on at work? I'm like, this is what's going on at work, but I'm generally fine with it. So I don't think that's a major part of it. And then he was like, I'm going to run more tests. And he's like, you're the pinnacle of health. Like, you're totally fine. I can't find anything. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then he's like, go see a therapist. I'm like, okay, I'll go see a therapist. And that worked a little, but not really. And then I went into, I found a naturopath who started helping me. That was a lot better already because we found things, because we were looking at different stuff. And then we decided to move to Canada. And then that was a big thing, like selling everything you own, basically packing your family up and moving across the Atlantic, trying to find a house, settling in was a big thing. And that was kind of like a second hit where my body was like, you know what, take it slowly, you're not there yet.
So were you still
and that-
working when you made the move?
I wasn't. I was actually retraining to be a nutritionist at the time.
Okay, so you quit J&J at that point?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We separated.
Okay, can we
As
talk
part
about
of that
that? Can we talk about your resignation? Because
I
you're
went to
very
see.
senior in a big multinational corporate. You've been there for 15 years. And I think anybody who's listening who is in that situation and is either feeling burnt out or bored or just hasn't got the enthusiasm for it anymore and is thinking about quitting, let's dissect what you went through, so because it might just help somebody.
Yes, I think mine might have been a bit different from other people. It was very different from other people's separations. And mind you, I've gone through a lot of separations with employees because I was HR and that was often my role, right? Restructuring and letting people go. Because I was so sick and there was still discussions ongoing about this. How are we going to downsize the organization in HR? What roles are going to be available? How do we separate from people? Because in Germany, there's rules around that, and there might be compensation for that if it's an organizational decision to downsize, and you might get compensated for that. But I just couldn't go back. I was sitting at home and I got one sick note after the other. And I told the doctor, I was like, I literally, I cannot go back. It will break me. I'm getting nervous. Like I'm getting panic attacks thinking about having to go back there. I'm not doing it. Can you please help me? And he's like, yeah. And then I met with, so cute, with one of our juniors for coffee. And she was, she's like, you don't look good. I'm like, I don't feel well. And then she's like, you know what? I'm going to talk to them and we can see if we can actually expedite this process. So at least I had a decision and not this, oh, we're going to be discussing this for like 3-4 more months with everybody. And then, so I got an okay that I could sign papers. And I was like, okay, like I just need to be done with it. I need to have that check mark no matter what's coming, but I need to get out of this. I'm not getting any better otherwise. So I did that. I got everything in the mail. We sorted it all out. And then I had to go. I had to return my company. I had a company car. I had to return my company car. I had to hand the papers in and I had to, and then you have to do this thing of your badge needs to be returned. You have to collect signature. And I was like, I don't want to face this. And it was so, I was actually really lucky because by that time there was a new manager in place. Her and I didn't know each other. She was very kind. The people I dropped things off were super kind. The HR team is like, we totally understand. Do you want like a big goodbye? Because normally there would be a thing in the cafeteria where people would thank you. And I was like, you know what? Technically I do, but I don't. Like from do I feel that I deserve that after 15 years of working my butt off and getting amazing feedback and performance evaluations and whatnot? I'm like, yes, technically, but I'm just so not mentally able to do it. It probably doesn't even give me what I think it might, but it's just going to be torture. I was like, I actually don't want it. And so that was it. Like I was still in contact with a lot of
slipped away quietly.
I just slipped away. I was still in contact with a lot of my close peers who I was really like close, and we would meet outside of work. But some other ones went through a similar situation actually, and were like, oh my God, you're so lucky you're out, like you're done. And I had nothing really, I had a plan. Like I always thought, and my dad got sick while I was working there, and I was like, do things with food. I always believe food can heal the body, which I still do. And I was like, I want to become a nutritionist. So I started doing that online. But I had no job at that point. I needed to interview. That was a requirement for from the German government at that point. So I started applying for positions. And there were some interesting positions actually available. But at that point, we had made the decision we're going to go to Canada. So I told the lady at the employment agency, I was like, you know what, I can apply for this job. And if I get it, in 4 months, I'm going to resign. So are you okay with me being unemployed for a couple of months more? and I'm still applying for the positions, but I'm not seriously applying for them. She's like, yeah, okay, that's all, like, good, which was really interesting. The more open I was about things and the more I asked for what I wanted, it was kind of surprising that it was all possible. Like things like, because Germany is very like known to be kind of really strict and regulated and stuff. I was like, I'm still following your process, but it doesn't make any sense. I would like to deviate. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, we can help you with this. I'm like, oh wow, like this is really, I would have never expected things like that. So it was a wild time. It was a really wild time because I always thought of myself, it's like, okay, I'm going to apply for positions here. I have no clue yet what I'm going to do. And I was like, I can't really go like 40 hours a week working for somebody else. I cannot do it. I just can't. If they are not 100% aligned with my values, with my vision, like where am I going to find that even in a new country with a different culture? I'm like, I can't. I'm just gonna not make it. Like I'm gonna burn out right away again. And my husband, well, he had a job here, and then he's like, no, because Henry was at school part-time during the day because he was still very low grade. And that was just like a few hours a day. And we were like, no, you stay here, you help him get his foot on the ground so he gets like connected to his community. Well, then the pandemic hit, and then he worked in a store or anywhere anyhow, right?
So you had it all, right? You leave your job, then you're a full-time mom in a new country, and then you go into lockdown. I
Yeah,
mean, as far as change goes,
it was a lot. Yeah.
you
But it was
experienced it
kind of,
all.
yeah, like in retrospect, it was crazy. But in the end, it all worked out.
How did you keep a positive mindset? Well, I'm making an assumption that you kept a positive mindset just based on how you are now, but perhaps you didn't at the time. Can you talk to us about that?
It was hard. Like some of it was really hard. I think the biggest thing was that I was lucky that I was eligible for compensation to leave the company after 15 years. So I had a bit of money that there was no pressure for me to go back to work right away. And we had the agreement that it was okay for me to not work and look after Henry and make that my top priority. So that helped a lot.
Even that, I mean, you're saying it like it's an easy thing, but I mean, I know from experience and I know from working with lots of people, especially mums, that actually when you have come from a position of working full time and being in a job where you're well respected and there's a lot of pressure on you, etc., to then going to being a full-time mum is a very different pace and very different expectations, very different everything. So how was that transition for you?
I think it's actually interesting. For me, it was a bit different because of this burnout. I think it was kind of actually being a full-time mom was hard because I was burnt out. And kids aren't always easy, especially like the smaller they are and the right. And then for him, that was a big change too, coming here and going to school here. So that was emotionally draining. And because I was already kind of on my second burnout verge there, it was like, oh my God, this is hard. But then I decided because I needed something. I think you're right. So I was like, so I'm going to study a little. I'm just going to take courses and just build my knowledge. It's something for me to do while he's at school. And that was great because I'm always like the learner person and it was all new territory. So that was great because it gave you that stimulation and that challenge, right? So that was okay. I think now, from what you're saying, you come from a senior position. Once I actually went and started working again and became self-employed, that was way harder. And it still sometimes is today. I was actually at a networking meeting Monday last week, and there was a lot of entrepreneurial females. There were some people who worked in corporate environments. But we're having exactly that conversation. That now it's even harder because you come from 15 years experience, you have a reputation, and then you're starting in a place where it's online, there is competition, and there's people with 15 years experience in the online space, and you're like, I'm just a little person here. I'm just gonna have to work my way up again. Yes, I bring things to the table that maybe somebody else doesn't because of my experience, but still, I'm starting from scratch. I'm starting to build a reputation and an own business, right? I'm not going into a corporation where I might have a mentor or somebody who's going to push me and say, I'm going to put you into the right places and you're going to get traction very quickly. that's very different in the new job. And I find that is more difficult, or I'm noticing that way more now, a few years into the business actually, than I did at that moment. At that moment, it was more like, oh, something new. Let's try
Yeah.
something new. I have energy to try something new without even reflecting on what that could have
Yeah.
actually.
And then you suddenly realize, oh, hang on, I haven't got IT support and I haven't got HR.
There's no
Well, you're the
accountant,
HR
there's
person.
no finance.
So what? And I have to make my own cup of tea.
Yeah, well, we were all very like independent, I think, at J&J, and very small, like from a team perspective, like in terms of who's there and what you needed to do. But it's really this, yeah, now you're your own boss, but there's everything you need to do, right? It's like you have to do accounting, you have to do marketing, you have to do sales, you have to do customer service. Yeah,
The whole lot.
the
Yes,
whole lot.
it's definitely different. So you experiment and go on all these courses. And then do you want to talk to us about how you've ended up doing what you, well, tell us what you're doing and then tell us how you ended up doing it.
Yeah, so what I do today is I help women who either can't sleep or are burnt out getting their sleep or their energy back. And I do that by doing functional testing on them. So I look at what's going on in their gut, with their hormones, with their minerals. Why are they burnt out, or why are they not sleeping? And then I put a plan together for them and help them, coach them through what might be interfering with their health physically. And often it's also, there's a mindset and like a coaching component to it as well. How
That
did I
sounds
get?
really fun. I mean, you're kind of
Yeah,
like a detective, aren't
I
you?
am. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really that in HR, I always loved that combination of like data and analysis and logic, and the people part of it, and pushing people and getting them better. And everybody was always like, you're the one who, like, when you come into a room, give people the most boring project, but you have that energy to carry people through. And that is really, I think, translating now very well, because if you're burnt out or you're not sleeping, it sucks and you struggle. And having somebody by your side to figure this all out and then guide you through, is, the ladies are very grateful.
Yeah, I bet
Um,
they are. How common is it for women to be burnt out and
I would
struggling
say
to sleep?
struggling to sleep is actually quite common. The more we get into like perimenopausal territory, like in our 40s, it's one of the first things I find that's going.
Yeah.
And we might not often think it's a problem, but eventually it becomes a problem. And I see a lot of women in the 30s who I think there's more the burnout from career, potentially children, that stretch. And then once it goes into the 40s or 50s, is often the hormonal changes, and with that gut health changes and stuff that really then impacts sleep. And then with that longer term, potentially just burnout. And we don't have as much energy in our 40s than we did in our 20s. And
No,
if we keep going at the same pace, it just doesn't.
it's a different ball game, isn't it? And I think we sort of forget that 200 years ago, we didn't live that long. We were lucky if we got to 50. So actually, this is like we now expect to live to 90 or 100 or whatever. And I think,
Exactly. And if you think about like women, like menopause is basically the end of fertility, right? And women died at that point. It's basically almost like, oh, you have no more value in this society, you're dying. Okay. Now you have very much have value, but your energy levels change because your hormone levels change. And also, like, there's more and more employers, I find, and I try to do that with public speaking too, that become aware of that there is a huge group in the workforce that is going through a lot of these health changes that are normal, and that I think are more and more women who don't want to go on birth control and suppress. They want to manage symptoms, but they kind of want to do that in a healthier way. And some of the companies are starting to understand that they need to support women differently. And that's great. And that's important because we're supposed to work for a lot longer in the workforce, but we need ways to accommodate women in certain stages, and are going to get hit with andropause too. It just shows a little different.
yeah,
But I think this aging population in terms of workforce is not just this, oh yeah, we have maybe physically worked for 40 years and we're just physically exhausted from doing hard physical labor, or even doing work where the environment changes and we can't keep up with the technology because we're 55 and we're like, oh, I don't need another software introduction, right? Like, I get that. But it actually starts for a lot of women, it starts even earlier. And then you see the young kids kind of passing by you and you're like, oh my God, like what's happening to me, right? Like, why am I all of a sudden not there? Why is my brain fogged? Why am I just not on point anymore? And there's so much we can do for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your question was, how did I end up there? When I came to Canada, I was like, I think I'm running into another burnout. I
What were
found a
the
naturopath.
signs that you were heading that way?
Oh, I was not sleeping. Like I wake up in the middle of the night. I was like, at 1 o'clock, my mind racing, not being able to go back to sleep for hours. PMS, like my periods were all over. It was not fun. Anxiety and just no drive and no fun for like things that I used to enjoy. I just didn't really enjoy that much anymore and didn't have energy for it. I know these signs. I'm gonna just say, hello, guys. I need to like now I'm gonna pull the brakes early. And then I went and got some testing done with the naturopath here, but she wasn't really so helpful. And then I found somebody online who was a functional practitioner and she really spoke my language. She's like, oh yeah, I look at all these things. So I started working with her. And that point I was like, I'm not making any money. Yes, I got my compensation thing there from leaving, but I don't have income and working with a functional practitioner isn't free. And I felt really bad. And my husband's like, can we stop this? This is your health. Like we need you to be on point so you can take care of our child. Do you trust this lady? I'm like, yes. Do you think she can help you? Yes. Okay. Are you okay to do what she says? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, then let's like try it. Give it a try. If you're not happy with the support you're getting here, you gotta have to look elsewhere. And it was great. And she helped me and I got back on track. And then I was like, so what could I do? I want to dive into this more because nutrition was part of that, but there's way more to it with the testing and stuff. So I trained in that. And then at that point, I found somebody online and she was in Luxembourg at the time, Christine, and she had a sleep business, Sleep Like a Boss. And she had a team. And I was like, could I talk about sleep all the time? Like, is that something that interests me? I'm like, yes, because I used to be a rock star sleeper in my 20s. Like I would hit the pillow and I was out and I would get up half hour before the alarm and I would get going, which I now know is not a good thing. But anyhow, I thought I was great and I had tons of energy. And then I wasn't sleeping even though I had burnout. And I just never understood that originally. I'm like, how can the body be exhausted and I cannot sleep? Like it can be. Yes, it can be because of all these things that were going on. And then I joined her team. And then she was at that point kind of out the door with the business. She told me that when she onboarded me, she's like, somebody else from the team is going to take over. So you'd be working with that person. I'm like, yeah, that's totally cool. I really like that person. And then I think like 3 years ago, I get like a Voxer. She's like, so the person who it was done deal, she was going to take over the business is not doing it. So I'm either shutting the business down or do you want to take it over? I was like, because we were all self-employed, had our own little companies, and we're kind of like working under this umbrella structure. And she's like, yeah, and there's a podcast that comes with it that you could take over. Like, you don't have to, but you could do all these things. I'm like, oh my goodness, can I like sleep over this or at least think for like 10 minutes? And then I was like, well, yeah, I'll do it because it's like that's my big flag waving at me, like that's my chance to scale the business faster than doing this on my own because
Yeah.
I'm buying a business with an email list and everything, right?
Essentially turnkey.
It was turnkey.
Amazing.
It was still a crazy first year because I wasn't an entrepreneur. I was just in business by myself. I was like, oh, okay, so now I'm taking over a business. Now I'm running a podcast. Now I'm doing all these things. Which took a year to kind of sort that out. Like once I've gone through the whole cycle, it was okay. And then I've completely pivoted. She used to do a lot of CEOs, executive athletes. She was targeting, and I'm still doing high performing people, but mostly women, because I just feel we just struggle because of the hormones. We struggle more than men, and we just need to be on point because we're doing 50 bajillion jobs a day. And we just need to feel like we deserve to feel good, but we also need to feel well. And so that's just my target audience, and I'm loving it.
It's definitely coming through how much you love it. And it's such a topical thing. I think, 10 years ago, people didn't really talk about sleep. If they talked about sleep, it was, how to survive on less sleep, if
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
And it's really nice to see that sleep is now being recognized as the thing, isn't it? That is obviously, as well as nutrition and exercise and mindfulness and so on. But I'm just about to launch my first book, and I have a section on sleep. And I think, people are going to be like, but what's sleep got to do with my career and making career choices? And I'm like, it's got absolutely everything to do with it, because it's impossible, as we all know. I think, especially those of us who are parents, it's impossible to make good decisions when you're sleep deprived. It's like a special kind of torture, isn't it? Trying to do
It is.
anything or make any kind of big decision if you're not sleeping well. And I think, and even small decisions like what to eat. I'm preaching to the converted, obviously, but we all know that we're more likely to grab the chocolate or the junk food than we are something healthy if we're sleep deprived. So I think it's just such an important and frankly fascinating area to explore. I mean, what a brilliant job you've got yourself there. I mean, job, stroke, business, whatever you want to call it. I think it's so topical. And how wonderful that you can help people with this sleep thing. And I'm like you, or like you were in your 20s, I can pretty much sleep anywhere, anytime. I'm really good at
Awesome.
sleeping.
Love.
Yeah, but I also love a nap. I talk about napping quite a lot because it's my favorite thing. People are like,
Yeah.
but aren't you then sluggish for the rest of the day? And I'm like, no, quite the opposite. I have a 20-minute power nap and I'm super sharp, much sharper than I would have been if I hadn't had that nap. But my dad's a big napper, so I think it's probably in the genes. So tell me about, what does your day look like now that you're
Well,
not
I was
tied to
two
the
kind
nine
of
to five?
my 9 to 5. Yeah. See, that has kind of gone out the window a bit, right? I have to say, for the last few years, I've tried to make my life fit that job. And that got very stressful. And I'm still your type A person, and I can still completely overload my to-do list and freak myself out if things don't get done. But I've learned so hard with that physical breaking down that I'm a lot more conscious of things now. So what I've done now is I've really downscaled the job to fit my life. And it's a lot less stressful. It's a lot, yeah, things don't get done, but that's okay. And I had to, like, that took me a long time to come to that space. So basically, what do? I have two kind of different days. I have days where like today, I'm being interviewed for a podcast, or I interview for my podcast, or I write a blog, or I work on admin stuff. And then I have days where I see clients. I separate that because I need my brain to focus on one thing. I can't switch between coaching and finance very well. Like it just drains me, and I never get in a flow then.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find it not very efficient. So I really have these, what I kind of call content and admin days, and then I have client days. And on client days, because I do my coaching remotely, I meet with my clients on Zoom. We go through, we coach, we go through their testing results, we go through their protocols. And I guide them, and they always can talk to me like in between the sessions too. But that's basically, I would say, the big difference. And I take my time in the morning to get my son ready for school, to drop him off at school. I have him home for lunch for an hour, and then I pick him up in the afternoon. And then I'm not a good evening person with work. Like, I'm just not. So I normally, won't find me working evenings. I do sometimes work on the weekends. I don't see clients there, but if I have to catch up on something, and Henry was sick and was a day home, because that happens all the time. For a long time, I was like, no, I need those 2 days on the weekend to really not do anything for work. And I need to be a bit strict with that too, that it's like, it's that hour and a half and then I'm done. But it works quite well. The one thing I'm still struggling with in all of this is like yes, I try to exercise regularly, but like fitting that in there is sometimes a bit of a, and then I prioritize business over exercise sometimes. And then it's kind of like, yeah, I have to work on that a little.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's not that you haven't got time for it. It's just that you're not prioritizing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it's really, I think that's the thing. But I also think, yes, and I know with exercise, it's consistency, but it's sometimes also there's also different phases. Sometimes it's like, yeah, there is a phase sometimes in my business in the calendar year where things are extremely busy. And yes, should I prioritize exercise because it helps me feel? But sometimes things just like one ball is going to drop, and I'm going to make the one drop that is not the egg that's not going to break. And
Yeah.
for me, at that point, that, for instance, could be something else sometimes, right?
Mm.
I think this, when you're an entrepreneur, this whole thing of like work-life balance kind of looks very different than it does when you have a corporate job.
It does look different. And I think I've been employed, self-employed, employed, self-employed. And I think now I finally worked out that actually you just have to, I put things in my calendar now that is like, I put the gym in my calendar 3 times a week. And then I just don't book anything else. And it sounds really simple, but actually, and everybody's different, but that works really well for me. And I'm like, that's my time to go to the gym, or that's my time to catch up with a friend. And once it's in the calendar, it's in the calendar. And I just see it as, I don't have availability then. So I think it is it is just something that you sort of learn along the way. And it is a kind of a game that you have to learn. You have to learn the rules. But it's really fascinating to hear, and interesting that you sort of compartmentalize what you work on. That's really quite fascinating. And I'm sure that does make you much more productive than trying to, do the finances and then the podcast interview and then everything else all in one go. So that's really,
Yes.
I love hearing that. What is your definition of success nowadays?
You know what? For me, it is going to bed at night feeling good. That's all it is. It's really that simple. It doesn't have to do with how many clients I signed, how many blogs I posted, or anything like that, because it's really just managing time and energy well with a special needs child at home, with all the things, with me not working. That's not a full-time job right now. My business, because it's just not feasible time-wise. Being okay with that and seeing the things that give me energy, doing those and avoiding the ones, like literally actually avoiding the ones that drain, is, to me, if I can do that and I can feel great with that, that's all I need. And yes, do I want my clients to be happy and sleep and stuff? Yeah. And then, but that's one of those giving me energy things, right?
Yeah.
But it's, to me, it's really, success is not, yeah, it's really not that corporate, how big's your paycheck.
And when you say feeling good when you go to bed at night, is that physically or mentally or both?
Both,
Yeah.
I think. Well, because A, I think they're connected,
Mm.
and B, yeah, just reflecting on the day and thinking, I did everything I could. That was enough. That was
Mhm.
good.
And if I'd asked you, I don't know, 15 years ago, what your definition of success was, what would you have answered then?
Honestly, that my inbox is empty, that my to-do list is worked on, everything I wanted to work on. And that I've been to the gym 4 times a week. Literally, that would have been and it wasn't the paycheck, because we always said like that, we were always fairly compensated and stuff. That wasn't a thing for me, but it was really, I think my self-worth was a lot of like ticking boxes on to-do lists.
It's fascinating how things change, how we change,
Yes.
how our priorities change. So I'm always really fascinated to hear what people say. And it's actually, I don't think I've come across a single person yet that said, yeah, my definition of success, 10, 15 years ago was the
Was the
same as
thing.
it is today. It'll happen one of these days, no doubt. But so far, I haven't had anybody say that yet. So if somebody's interested in finding out more about what you do, how do they find you? Where do they find you?
You can find me on sleeplikeaboss.com. That's our website. Or you can find me at _ Anika Carroll on Instagram, and I'm also on LinkedIn. But it's, yeah, those are basically the places I'd say I hang
Brilliant.
out.
And I'll include those details in the show notes as well. It's been so
Awesome.
fascinating to hear your story. And hopefully, anybody that's listening that's in a corporate job that is perhaps thinking it's not right for them anymore going forward and they want to make a change, hopefully, our conversation will inspire them. So, thank you so much for sharing. Annika, it's been such a pleasure to have you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that story.
My pleasure.